The frost is blooming on the inside of the shelter's primary viewport, a jagged lace of ice that whispers of the coming freeze. But that's not what worries me. It's the thermal scanner, my Mark IV eye. The fracture across the primary lens has become a conduit for the cold, allowing the biting exterior air to seep into the sensor housing. It's fogging, blind. A blind man in the oasis is just a walking corpse waiting for the scourge to find him. I can hear the wind howling outside, a low, guttural moan that sounds like the world is finally giving up. I'm not ready to give up. Not yet. I need heat. A localized, controlled burn to keep the silic glass clear and the internals from shattering under the thermal shock. If the sensor freezes, the internal crystals will crack, and I'll be left staring into a void, while whatever's prowling out there in the scorch wash moves in for the kill. I reach into the bin of forgotten purpose, a rusted crate filled with the skeletal remains of a civilization that thought it had solved everything. My fingers, calloused and stained with carbon soot, sift through the fossils. The grit of the wasteland has a way of getting into everything, even the sealed components. I feel the sharp edge of a shattered logic gate and the smooth, cold curve of a dead comms unit. Here, a remnant of a personal climate core. It's a shattered husk, its casing melted into a slag pool of synthetic skin and charred polymer. I pry it open with a rusted shim, the metal protesting with a high-pitched shriek that echoes in the cramped silence of my lab. Inside, coiled like a copper viper, is the resistive filament I need. It's a delicate fossil, prone to snapping if handled with too much haste. I can feel the weight of it. The ghosts of the engineers who wound these coils in sterile factories miles below the earth, never imagining they'd be salvaged by a ghost like me. This coil was designed to keep a wealthy citizen's coffee warm. Now, it's going to be the internal fire that keeps my eyes open. I carefully extract it, the wire thin as a spider's silk, coated in a crumbling layer of ceramic insulation. It's beautiful in its decay. The scanner sits on the bench, its fractured lens reflecting the dim, flickering blue of my last surviving LED strip. It looks like a wounded animal, its housing scarred by shrapnel from the last dust storm. To fix it, I'll need more than just the coil. I need a way to bond it to the lens without obscuring the sensor's field of view. I dig deeper into the pile, my movements slow, rhythmic. I find a strip of high-temp synthetic skin, salvaged from the exhaust manifolds of a derelict hauler I found half-buried 3 clicks north. It's weathered, grayed by decades of UV exposure, but the molecular bond is still strong. This will be the carrier. The graft requires precision. One slip and the heat bloom will melt the delicate sensor array, turning my eye into a lump of useless slag. I find a pair of static traps in the guts of an old comms relay. They're bloated, leaking a foul-smelling electrolyte that smells like vinegar and copper, but they still hold a residual hum. I'll need them to regulate the flow, to ensure the filament doesn't draw too much from the oasis's failing transient faults. Every milliwatt is a drop of blood in this place. I can't afford to bleed out for a scanner that might only show me my own end. The air in the lab is thick with the smell of wet iron and old ozone. My lungs ache with every breath, a reminder that the scrubbers are also on their last legs. But focus is the only currency that matters now. The frequency is locked. The Silic-Fossils are laid out on the bench. Let the graft begin. I clear the workbench with a sweep of my sleeve, sending a cloud of gray dust and tiny, unidentifiable metallic shards dancing into the blue-tinted shadows. The heat wand is humming in its cradle, a low-frequency thrum that vibrates through the rusted tabletop and into my bones. Its ceramic tip is pitted, scarred by years of forced labor in this damp hole. It's a crude instrument, a relic of a precision soldering station that likely lived in a sterile clean room before the sky turned to iron. Now, it's my scalpel. I breathe on my hands, the warmth of my breath a pathetic contrast to the creeping frost, and try to stop the shaking. The chill is settling into my joints, making my fingers feel like rusted hinges that haven't seen oil in a century. The thermal scanner's housing is held together by 3 corroded hex bolts, their heads rounded by decades of salt air and neglect. I use a shard of sharpened rebar, ground down to a fine point, to coax them out. They groan, a metallic protest against being disturbed from their long, frozen slumber. Once the shell is off, the guts of the eye are exposed. It's a labyrinth of green silic planes and hair-thin gold traces that shimmer like funeral jewelry in the LED light. The fracture in the glass has allowed the rust bloom to start at the edges, a creeping oxidation that looks like copper-colored lichen. I have to excise the rot before the graft can take, or the heat will only accelerate the decay. I reach for the first static trap. It's a cylindrical beast, salvaged from a high-yield power rectifier. It feels unnervingly heavy, bloated with a residual charge it has no right to hold after all these years. I've seen men, veteran scavengers who knew their way around a board, thrown across a room by a static trap that didn't want to let go of its ghost. I take a length of insulated wire, stripped at both ends, and bridge the terminals with a steady, if trembling hand. A blue spark jumps, a sharp, violent crack like a pistol shot that echoes in the cramped silence of the oasis. The scent of ozone intensifies, sharp and metallic. The beast is drained. Now I can perform the surgery without the risk of my heart being stopped by a dead world's leftovers. I begin the desoldering. The old solder, the silver blood of the dead world, is brittle and grey, having lost its shine long ago. I apply the heat wand, and for a moment the room fills with the suffocating smell of ancient pine resin and chemical rot as the flux vaporizes. I use a copper braid, itself a fossil found in a derelict workshop, to suck away the old joints. This is the acid spit phase, where the cleaning agents in the braid hiss and pop, biting into the oxidation. One by one, I disconnect the failing thermal sensor leads. It's a delicate dance. If I hold the heat too long, the copper traces will lift, peeling away from the silic plane like burnt skin on a radiation victim. Too little, and I get a false bond, a cold joint that looks solid, but will shatter the first time the wind rattles the shelter walls. Now, the filament. I take the resistive coil I harvested from the climate core. It's the heart of the graft, the new muscle for the eye. I need to wrap it around the perimeter of the fractured glass, creating a heat ring that will drive the frost away from the sensor's focal point. I use the strip of synthetic skin, the gray leathery plastic, as a bed. I lay it down against the glass, then use the tip of the heat wand to tack it into place. It melts with a foul, acrid smoke that stings my eyes and catches in my throat. I ignore it. In the oasis, you learn to breathe the poison, or you simply stop breathing. The plastic fuses to the glass, a permanent scar that will hold the heater in place. I begin the suture. I wind the copper coil around the lens, pressing it firmly into the soft, cooling synthetic skin. The wire is stubborn, a coiled spring of memory trying to return to its original shape. "Stay down," I mutter, my voice a raspy whisper in the dark. "Help me see the wolves, and I'll keep the current flowing." The wire settles, biting into the plastic. It's a messy, ugly fix, but the physics are sound. Resistance creates heat. Heat creates clarity. I bridge the ends of the coil to the static traps I prepared. These will act as the flow chambers, smoothing out the jagged, unstable pulses from the oasis's failing transient faults. I use a bit of scavenged resin, sticky amber-colored sap from a mutated pine I found in the northern wastes, to hold the connections steady while I apply the new solder. This silver blood is a precious hoard, melted down from 1,000 different boards and refined in a crucible made of a hollowed-out piston. It flows like liquid mercury, bright and shimmering, as it bonds the copper of the coil to the pads on the scanner's board. The fracture in the glass is still there, a jagged lightning bolt across my field of vision. It's a permanent reminder of the world's fragility. But now it's bridged by the heater, a glowing copper vein designed to keep the darkness at bay. I apply one last layer of synthetic skin over the top, a protective shroud to keep the heat focused inward toward the sensor rather than wasting it on the freezing air. The scanner looks different now. It's no longer a sleek piece of pre-collapse technology. It's a cyborg, a hybrid of high-spec glass and wasteland scar tissue. My hands are cramping, the muscles in my forearms screaming from the tension of the fine motor work. The cold is winning the battle for the room's temperature. I need to close the housing before the internal components reach a critical low. I check the resistance with a battered meter box, its needle jumping erratically before settling on a value. It's high, leaning toward the edge of what the flow chambers can handle, but it's stable. The graft has taken. The surgery is complete, but the patient hasn't woken up yet. The spirit in the machine is still sleeping, waiting for the spark. I slot the eye back into its mounting bracket, the metal-on-metal scrape sounding like a wheezing lung. The housing is heavy now, burdened by the weight of the graft and the layers of synthetic skin. I tighten the salvaged hex bolts one last time, feeling the threads bite into the oxidation. It's as secure as anything can be in a world that's slowly turning to powder. My fingers are numb, the tips a pale, sickly blue, but the work is done. All that remains is to feed the ghost. I take the power umbilical, a thick, braided cable of frayed copper and stained insulation, and plug it into the scanner's intake port. It's a tight fit, the connector scarred by 1,000 previous connections. I move to the primary power array, where the transient vaults sit in their lead-lined cradles. They're humming, a deep, subsonic vibration that I feel more in my teeth than my ears. I throw the manual knife switch. The oasis flickers. The cyber-blue LEDs overhead dim to a ghostly violet, before surging back to life as the vaults compensate for the new draw. For a heartbeat, the lab goes silent, the only sound the frantic thumping of my own heart against my ribs. Then, I hear it. A faint, high-pitched hiss. It's the resistive coil. It's drinking. I lean in close to the scanner, my breath held. The fracture across the silic glass begins to weep. The frost, that jagged lace of death, is melting, turning into beads of water that sizzle and evaporate against the warmth of the heater. The heat ring is working. The thermal shock is being neutralized, the internal temperature of the housing climbing back into the operational red zone. I watch as the fog clears, a slow-motion curtain being pulled back from a window I thought was shuttered forever. I press my eye to the rubber gasket of the viewfinder. At first, there is only static snow, a chaotic swirl of white and gray pixels dancing across the screen. I adjust the gain knob, my fingers feeling the grit inside the potentiometer. The snow settles. The phosphor glow bleeds into the frame, a sickly, radioactive green that defines the world in gradients of heat and cold. The lab looks like a graveyard of glowing bones. The power cables are rivers of dull orange. The transient vaults are pulsing monoliths of deep crimson. I pivot the scanner toward the primary viewport, looking out into the scorch wash. The world outside is a frozen wasteland of deep, abyssal blues, the absolute zero of a dead planet. The wind-scoured dunes are flat, featureless plains of ice shadow. But then, I see it. On the edge of the perimeter, near the rusted ribs of the old water tower, there's a bloom. A smudge of flickering yellow-white that shouldn't be there. It's moving. It's not the aimless swirl of a dust devil or the heat leak of a subterranean vent. It has a rhythm, a predatory, calculated gait. It's a heat ghost, a signature of something with a heartbeat or a cooling engine, circling the oasis, looking for a breach in the synthetic skin of my sanctuary. The graft held. I have my eyes back, but now that I can see, I find myself wishing for the blindness. The frost was a slow death. What's out there in the dark is much, much faster. I lock the scanner's gimbal, tracking the bloom as it vanishes behind a ridge of scrap iron. It knows I'm here. The heat is holding, but the shadows are getting longer. The world outside is screaming, and now I have to watch it happen. My eye is open, but the vision is grim. Keep your frequencies masked and your static traps dry, scavengers. The night is long, and the ghosts are getting hungry. If you want to see the blueprints for the long-range arrays, find the deeper archives. Stay low. Stay silent.